everyone out there. If you're new to this, this is Go Learn, the University of Utah's travel program, a faculty-led travel program. Today, we have Rick Paine here, an anthropologist and archaeologist who took us on trips in the past. We are trapped at home at this point, and today we're bringing sort of like the road to you. Earlier, Rick was saying he will present on how you should spend your summer. So, but it's all about his research down in El Mirador, Guatemala, today's Guatemala. We're talking about pre-classic Mayan civilization. Again, a shout out to the Department of Archaeology and Anthropology here at the University of Utah. If
people might not be thrilled with that, I'm sorry. We are very definitely the Department of Anthropology.
Yes. What did I say? College?
Well, you put archaeology first, and while a lot of us are archaeologists, we're anthropologists first.
Okay. Well, and that is an interesting thing, and maybe you can say something about that. What that really means. What's the difference between the two? But I will finish my introduction here. Also, as we have people we're hoping people who are new to the University of Utah or who are alumni. We want to give a shout out to the Alumni Association, because this is brought to you by them as well. This is for you. This is for our alumni. This is for anyone who's interested. So thank you for doing this, Rick. I will get out of the way here soon. But again, thank you for joining us today here. And Rick, feel free to have a little bit more of an introduction. And I will be in the room, but I will make myself invisible. Does that sound good?
Sounds fine.
Thank you.
So, hello. So what I wanted to do today is, because we're all sort of COVIDed, is in a normal summer, I would be leaving for the field right about today. I think last year we went out on the 25th. We usually go out somewhere between the 20th and the 1st of July. And so I wanted to kind of keep with the travel theme of Go Learn and make this a little bit travel log, but also try to mix in some of the science, some of the things we're trying to do at Mirador. So I am going to disappear and share my screen now to start giving you an idea of what we're going to be talking about. So if you can see my arrow, El Mirador is in northern Guatemala. It's located right about where my arrow is right now. If we get a little closer, it's right about here. So it's not quite on the Mexican border. It's located in a large, mostly internal drainage basin, kind of like here, except that it's covered in neotropical rainforest. El Mirador was large, probably the largest pre-classic Maya site. I'm not going to try to tell you how many people lived there, because I've been spending the last several years and will be spending the next several years, among other things, trying to figure that out. But it's a lot, many, many tens of thousands. And we'll start showing some pictures in a minute. So anyway, about now in a normal year, we would have flown to Guatemala City right about here within the last few days. And then we'll take either a bus, depending on the year, either a bus or a little small airplane, and fly up to Flores, which is just above the T in Paten. You can see my arrow again. And from there, we start the real trip into El Mirador. So anyway, there's a little closer map. This is actually a fire map. So every little red dot around here, and it's a few years old, but you get the idea. So every little red dot is a fire in the forest. All of those fires, or virtually all of those fires, are man-made. And what they are is people clearing land either for farming or for cattle pasture. And as you can see, the reserve that El Mirador is part of, which extends across into Mexico, is one of the big defenses that's protecting this area from deforestation. Anyway, the normal routine for most is would leave Flores. You hop on a bus, yes, that bus, and you're on that bus for about 2 to 3 hours, most of which is along a dirt road, until you reach the village of Carmelitas, which is the end of the road. There, all of the equipment is offloaded from the bus. So the bus is typically carrying, a handful of archaeologists and grad students, both Guatemalan and foreign. And we're meeting in Carmelitas, we're meeting the majority of our daily workmen, who you can see who are gathering here. From there, all of the gear is loaded onto mules. And that includes, everything, or nearly everything that you're going to need for the season. You can see things get packed up pretty well. But everything is loaded onto mules. The project either owns or rents about 70 mules. And those mules will be going back and forth between Carmelitas and El Mirador for the remainder of the excavation season. So they'll go out with initial stuff, but from there, it will be food and supplies to last the rest of the season. So off go the mules on the same set of trails. Off go most of the crew. I have taken this route to Mirador. It's about a 2-day walk. And so you overnight at another archaeological site called Tintal, where there's a camp set up to set up for that overnight. So they have tents waiting for you. The project has tents waiting for you. And from there, you hike on to El Mirador. And like I said, that I have made the trip this way. Those of you, I hope there are a couple people out there who've traveled with us. You know that I'm not that young, and so for those of us who are a little older and a little more kind of self-important, we take a helicopter. And you can see in the picture, I'm very happy to be getting in the helicopter rather than walking. The helicopter turns a 2-day trip across very hot, humid rainforest into about a 35-minute trip. And so you hop on in Santa Elena, which is right beside Flores. You fly out over Lake Petén, Lake Petén-Itzá, past the island of Flores. Flores is a very pretty little town. It has antecedents. It was a Maya settlement before the arrival of Europeans. It was taken over by Spanish conquistadores in about 1570. And the town of Flores has been there as a primarily European settlement since about 1570. So you fly out over Lake Petén-Itzá and head out over the north of the Petén. And this is what, as you're going across, most of it looks like. So if you look around, you'll see lots of big open spaces. Most of the open spaces that you can see are being turned into cattle pastures. Some are being farmed for especially maize, but a variety of subsistence crops. And you see a lot of forest being cleared by cutting and burning, like the fire that's going on here. And again, this is a shot from the helicopter. As you get over the basin, things change. So if you look out over the basin now, for the most part, you're looking at a sea of green. There is some intrusion into it. And so there are illegal roads being cut into it. There are logging concessions in it, again, that are supposed to be very careful about how they remove things. But there are issues of deforestation in the park, but to a very large extent, it's a big protected zone, and it's one of the biggest zones of relatively intact rainforest in the New World north of the Amazon. So we're flying across there. Just to introduce some of the other people who are working here. So on the, looking at this, to the left is my colleague from geography, Andrea Brunel. She studies ancient environments. In the center is Richard Hanson. He's an adjunct in our department, and he's the overall director of the Mirador Basin Project. And the other guy you know. Also important in here, and important to folks in Go Learn, is Valerie Gates. Valerie Gates is my wife, but she also, we lead trips for Go Learn together, and Valerie is also working with us in Mirador. She works both with me in the fields, but the other thing that she's doing, which is an important part of the project, is we have an educational program for our workmen. And so the workmen can take weekly night classes in reading and writing, in financial literacy, in some basic mathematics, and in English. And Valerie runs the English language program at West High School, and so she's been helping us to make our educational program a little stronger, because most of us, well, we're doing our best, but she's making us a lot more effective. Okay. So you arrive in camp, and what you find is most of the crew is living in tents like the one on the left. They're big tents. So every individual is in what I think we would call a 4-person tent with a big tarp over it, because, well, it is the rainforest. We have some permanent structures. So right in the center is our lab. The lab is equipped with internet for a couple of hours a day. So one of the things that is important is all of our electricity is provided by gas generators. And so we have electricity for about 2 or 3 hours every evening. And there it's to light the kitchen, it's to light the lab so that people can work. And we also have satellite internet, which keeps us in touch with the outside world, and which is very important, not only scientifically, but to everybody's morale. We have a full kitchen facility. So this is the dining space. And once again, with food, and so there's just a picture from inside the kitchen. 2 hours a day of electricity, everything traveling in by mule, which means that all food has to be very transportable. It can't be perishable. And so, it's cooked on a natural fire. That means an awful lot of pasta, rice, and beans. We get really lucky, more and more, maybe a couple times a week these days, and we get fresh bread made in a wood oven. This is the preparation of that, and that is kind of pure joy when you're out there. The bread is delicious. It's a shift from the normal pattern, and it makes just all the difference in the world. Occasionally, we'll get some fresh food that'll arrive by helicopter. So you know, a load of chicken will come in, a load of fresh fruit will come in, and that'll happen kind of not quite every week. And here you see the mules coming in and bringing food and water. Some of us, again, those of us who are kind of old and self-important, there are a couple of permanent structures that people can live in. So this is a bungalow that I've lived in for a couple of summers. Okay, so Mirador itself. The site, like Christoph said, it's a pre-classic site. And so its initial occupation began not quite 3,000 years ago. And the site was largely abandoned around 1,800 years ago. So about the year 200. And the site, like I said, it was abandoned at that point. Later during the classic period, you get some reoccupation of the site. But the most important time period for El Mirador is between about 2,300 years ago, so about 300 BC, and about 1,800 years ago, so about 200 CE. And in that time, it was the largest population center, certainly in the Maya region, and for at least part of that time, probably in the New World. This is the top of the largest platform structure, pyramid structure at El Mirador. This is the top of a pyramid we call La Danta. And the pyramids, the pre-classic pyramids, are a little bit weird in that they're kind of like layer cakes. And so you'll have a great big platform, and that'll have 3 more platforms arranged in a triangle on top of that. And then the biggest of those may have another 3 on top of that. And that's what you have here. So this structure is the biggest in the 3rd level of this kind of stack of pyramids. We see early carving, some early writing at Mirador. Unfortunately, at this point, we can't read it. But this is a piece, an early stela piece. I'm without a pointer. I'm not going to try to get you all of just exactly what you're seeing. This is not El Mirador. So anyway, Mirador, it goes on for this period. Like I said, it comes to its end around 200 AD. That's the point of transition around the Maya area from the pre-classic into the classic. And so this is, if not the largest of the classic period sites, it's definitely one of the largest 3. And I say it that way because people disagree about their population numbers. So this is Tikal. Anyone who traveled to the area with us a few years ago recognizes the view So this is the view from the largest pyramid, Temple 4 at Tikal, back toward the center of town today. And important thing to note in this kind of picture is just as Mirador is falling, these classic period sites are taking off. And so Tikal, over the subsequent 500 years or so, will grow to have a population, certainly in the several tens of thousands. They'll be building great big pyramids and other pieces. So this is Temple 1 at Tikal. If we go back to the other picture, it's the one furthest to the left and the one that's facing us in this picture. So this is Temple 1, not built until the 8th century, celebrating great victories on the part of Tikal. Across the plaza from Temple 1 is Temple 2. Each of these, so one is somewhere in the range of 160 feet tall. 2 is in the range of 125 feet tall. They face each other across a big plaza with stela and other things in between. And alongside, there's a whole series of other temple structures and a palace structure all around this central plaza. And you might wonder why I'm showing you so much about this right now. Well, here it is again. So if you look carefully inside this, you can see if I can get my arrow. Here's Temple 1 again. Here's 2. Here's that system of other smaller structures that I showed you. You can't really see the palace in here, but laid over the top, this is one of these Triatic pyramids. This is the second largest Triatic pyramid at El Mirador. This is a site, a structure we call El Tigre. And it gives you an idea of some of the scale of what we're seeing there. So, basically the downtown core of Tikal fits in the footprint of the second largest structure at Mirador. Okay, we get a lot of, one of the really striking things at Mirador and at other pre-classic sites is this really extensive use of plaster in art. And so this is a part of a frieze there. It shows characters from a story in the Popol Vuh, which was still being told when the Spanish arrived, 1,500 years later. Here it is, a larger picture of that. The thing about all of this plaster, and so if you look, here's another, this is one of the small pyramids at the base of the platform of Tigre. And you can see the stairway is covered in thick plaster. It's harder to see, but there are masks on either side of the stairway. And all of this is done in this very, very thick plaster. And the plaster is really expensive. So it's expensive in terms of resources. You have to burn vast amounts of wood to make the plaster. You have to quarry the limestone to make it. And so in terms of energy, but also in terms of resources, it's very, very expensive stuff. And all of these big structures at Mirador are just covered in it. And it's saying something again about the resource consumption at the site. Here's just another view of the same place. You can see the mask on the other side. Maybe a better view. So if you look right in the center, you have the main figure. Just some other little pieces. These are from a small structure off on the edge of town called the Casa Corral. And this building was just covered in all of these strange little faces. Okay. The other big construction thing that we see at Mirador is a road network. So surrounding the site You have these low, today, kind of horrible swampy areas we call bajos. And you have these elevated, constructed out of stone and then covered in plaster, raised roads that radiate out of the site, some of which only travel a couple of miles, but some of which travel many miles to other sites. And again, huge effort and huge use of resources. So if you look around here, a couple of things you can tell from this. So the land around the edges of this bajo, not only is the land higher, but the forest is higher. It doesn't grow as high in the bajos. They're just nasty places. And you can see this raised road running through the center. Okay, so the big question for me and for lots of other people studying here is, first off, on a basic level, what happened to El Mirador? Why was it abandoned? But second is, why was El Mirador abandoned at just the time that a lot of these other sites like Tikal were taking off? And we think, and one of the things that I'm working with, is the idea that as some of these Maya sites grew and became very resource intensive in their activities. So on the one hand, their populations are growing, but also their consumption patterns are growing, that they became much more vulnerable to environmental change, even short-term environmental change. So in this picture, or in this marker, what you have, if you look right in the center in this circle, this is a drought, a great big drought, that coincided with the end of the Classic period. So at this time, and my pointer keeps disappearing, at this time, sites like Tikal and Kupan and others from the Classic period, they're all being abandoned in here. And we, like I said, the drought is certainly playing a big part in this, but also vulnerabilities probably are too. So you can see it's shorter, but there's another important drought here and another one here. And then the other one that I'm very interested in, come on, there we go, is this one here, because this one coincides with the pre-Classic abandonment of El Mirador. And like I said, the interesting part is Mirador is falling apart. These other sites are taking off. And this probably, looking at these probably has to do, or the working hypothesis for us is that you have sites like El Mirador, which in many ways are like those late Classic sites were when they were abandoned. So it's large populations in the tens of thousands of people. They're very resource intensive in terms of their construction. So they're consuming all of this plaster. Their agriculture is spreading really wide. And so it's those big sites that are vulnerable. And the ones that are just getting started, they're a little bit more resilient because their relationship to that environment is not quite as fraught as the Mirador one is at the end of the pre-Classic, or as all of those other sites are at the end of the Classic. So, big in there then is, in terms of understanding this for El Mirador, are two things. One, we really need to understand the population. So we need to understand the size of the population, the density of the population, and the pattern of growth and abandonment. But the problem that we run into, of course, is that El Mirador looks like this. And so it's heavily forested, and that traditionally has made estimating population really hard. So anyway, we are helped by this kind of miracle. And this miracle for us is a new technology. It's been around for about 10 years now, called Lidar. And what Lidar does is basically you fly over in an airplane with a laser that fires down at the ground thousands of times a second. And you have instrumentation that measures the time for the light to bounce back up to a receptor. And through computer miracles that I can't claim to be even close to understanding, they're able to filter out the canopy. And so you get an image like this, which shows this is central Mirador. So the Tigre Pyramid is right here. You see this walled segment in the center, and there's a little causeway coming out, and the big Ladanta Pyramid would be down here, just out of the picture. Okay, now I'm going to try to do something fancy here and go to a different program for just a second, and we'll see how it works. So this is a big composite LiDAR image for the whole basin. So if you were to go away from it, you'd see that the whole basin is here. But it's showing a lot of the space. So some things that you can see in here, these green flat areas are the bajos. You can see the elevated areas are where people lived. You can see some of these causeways. Here's one up here running off away from the site. Here's a smaller one down here. And so you can see some of that, and you can see the settlement of the site. So the Ladanta Pyramid, the biggest one, is right here. The Tigre Pyramid, unfortunately, is under that E right there. But now if we pull closer, you can just see how amazingly this works. So we can see more and more settlement. You can see all of these individual house groups. These are big, wealthy people's house groups. Again, you can see the structures on top of structures for the Ladanta Pyramid. There's a city wall. Let me move over here a little bit and show you a couple of, so later stuff that I'm going to show you is going to be, some of it's going to be taking place in this open space here, and some of it is going to be taking place up in this neighborhood up here. So anyway, where the LiDAR is just this tremendous tool for us. It allows us, like I said, to see through the forest. We still have to ground truth things, but the next wonder of technology that's happened in the last few years is this whole map is part of a GIS database. And so the next thing that we're able to do is you can enter, now remember there's no cell service out here, but you can take your phone, which has no service, but has a satellite link to it. Everyone's phone has a satellite link to it. And you can have a GIS program or a locational program in your phone that allows you to get up in the morning. The camp is kind of right here. You enter the log points of a structure. For example, we were excavating up here a couple of years ago. You enter the location into your phone, off you go. The phone directs you to where you want to go, and you wind up at a site that if you were working from the ground, you might not have been able to see from 20 feet away, but it's there. And so then you go ground truth, you get the timing of it. And it's just this kind of technology has utterly changed my life and the way I do things in terms of trying to understand ancient populations. Let's get back. So so we have this overall picture that comes from that. The problem that you run into if you walk off in the distance is even down below, there is a world of structures that can't be seen even on Lidar. So these are structures where soil composition, soil accumulation has covered them up over time. And so traditionally what we would do with that is try to locate structures basically through random testing. So we dig test pits all around and try to estimate probabilistically from the number of structures we found how many there really were. And it really doesn't work. We can't dig enough holes to get an accurate estimate. And so another thing that we're experimenting with and using is ground penetrating radar to try to help us see the structures that don't have any surface remain. And this is work that's really ongoing right now. I can't say that we're having perfect success with the GPR, but it's showing promise. And over time, we hope that's really going to help us to estimate how many structures there are that we kind of can't see from the surface. A little sidebar about the pictures here. The government of Guatemala owns every excavation picture that we take, and we have to get special permission to broadcast them or to portray them anywhere. And so you're not going to see any actual excavation pictures. You're all going to see what on site we call tourist pictures. And that's just because the permission process was just a little too much for this. And so I would have liked to have shown you some more excavation stuff, but it's going to be pretty much surface. So anyway, the GPR is helping us to see things underground, and then testing those for time. What that's going to do is allow us, we hope, to come up with kind of a curve of population, a trajectory of population, the accurately measuring the growth and decline of Mirador, and then combining it with the other big piece of what we're doing, which is environmental reconstruction. And that's mostly Andrew Brunel's role in this. This is just a field office. So this is what your office looks like day to day out there in the forest. And as you can see, you can't see a whole lot. Here's the interior of a field office. Okay. So the other thing that we're trying to do, this is down in one of the bajos, is use pollen and evidence of ancient burning, so ash layers, to get us a better picture of the specifics of ecological change around the site. So one of the things that we think is true here is we think the bajos were much more open water during the time when Mirador was occupied, which made them a source of drinking water, a source of agricultural water, and a really just central resource to the site's survival. Today, they're seasonal swamps, and they're full of this terrible clay, which we think in part is erosion runoff from the site itself. And so here we have a crew. What we're trying to do is sink a core into the bajo soils. Sometimes it gets, we work really hard at this. And so you need someone big to stand on top of it and jump up and down. And that was me here. But anyway, the cores will help us to get a finer grained picture of some of that environmental change. Couple it with the larger scale stuff about drought and our settlement trajectory, and the intent is that we're able to test the idea that a lot of the problems that Mirador ran into as other sites were taking off has to do with its kind of precarious environmental situation. And that, of course, has has lessons for us today as we're occupying a more and more precarious environmental situation, and we're vulnerable to these kinds of changes just as they were 1800 years ago. Okay, back to the travel log part for a while. Mirador in the basin is a beautiful place. It's full of wildlife. It's full of interesting plant life. These are some epiphytes on the side of a tree, the kinds of things that people have in their homes here today. We get all sorts of wildlife and visitors on site. So one day last summer, we got a family of owls that came to visit us. Here's the juvenile of the owls that came to visit us. We get all sorts of life. We literally see monkeys every single day. And so here's a howler monkey outside the kitchen, actually. We get different kinds of creatures. This is a creature referred to locally as a wo. It's a Mexican burrowing toad, who just came up in excavation. We get some friendlier visitors. So you know, there's a tremendous variety of insect life and things like that, and sometimes it gets close. Sometimes there's a little bit of rescue. So this little howler monkey, we're not sure how it wound up on the ground, but it last summer it found itself on the ground and horribly dehydrated and not long for this world. We fed it, and here's Valerie feeding it some basically maize gruel, and it was remarkable that this creature went from very near death to getting rambunctious in about an hour. It was separated from its family. It couldn't be released back into the wild, so it wound up back in Flores at a wildlife rescue center. And so it was helicoptered back, and hopefully it's back in the wild, but it's something that we can't really know right now. So anyway, like I said, just utterly spectacular place that is severely in need of protection. We would be there. So our normal field season, because of limitations of water and of course the academic calendar, we have to wait for cisterns to fill enough water to go. So we have to be into the rainy season before we can go. And then the other end is mostly governed by the academic calendar. So we'd be there until somewhere around the first week of August. And then again, you're lucky, you're helicoptering out, you're flying back across the town of Flores one more time, landing in, and then if you're lucky, you get the reward, you get a day or two in the beautiful highlands of Guatemala. And so this is the town of Antigua, Guatemala. Cool temperatures, beautiful surroundings. Here's Valerie get in the looking out from a hotel room in Antigua. You get a nice thick bed for a couple of days. You get a lot of nice food. We're talking 2 days, but you get some nice food, and you get to interact a little bit with the modern people of modern Maya. And by somewhere around like I said, the end of the first week of August, you're back here again. And of course, this year is utterly different. And so I'm going to try I don't know how to get myself back on the screen. Christoph, do you know how I get myself back on the screen?
If you stop sharing your screen, that should be enlarging us. So you just enter the slideshow. There we go. That's it.
So anyway, that's what a summer for Valerie and me should look like. But clearly that's not what it looks like this summer. Anyway, I'm so happy to take questions either about the normal summer or anything else.
This was great. I mean, wow, I learned so much. And spending, with you, learning about the life of an anthropologist, it's like Indiana Jones, but and it's just great to hear, and it's amazing to hear. It takes, if it wasn't for a helicopter, you would be, you walked into this for 2 days and walked out pre-helicopter times. I mean, who found this stuff? Who were the first ones to kind of like go like, wait, there was an ancient civilization here, as early as 3,000 years ago.
Yeah, and so it's interesting. I mean, of course, local people knew that it was there, but this part of the Petén, when the Spanish arrive, is very, very empty. So the rainforest has fully returned. You have settlement down where Flores is, but you have very little in the way of local indigenous settlement in this part of the world. That started to change really in the 19th century. People started moving more and more back into the space. But the site, for outsiders, it first was noticed by a pilot in, I think, about 1930. And this was someone who flew over, and he didn't know his geology. He saw Ladanta and Tigre sticking up out of the forest, and he thought they were ancient volcanoes. But that's where the site got its name, was these two high points were outlook points. They're miradors. Wow. The site then, nobody thought about it until the 60s, and a very brave English archaeologist named Ian Graham spent literally years of his life with a couple of other guides mapping spaces out in the middle of the rainforest, and among the spaces that he mapped archaeologically were the kind of main buildings at Mirador. And at the time, when he said this was a pre-classic site, nobody believed him.
Really?
And it sits for now even, because it's so very isolated.
Cool. Let me get to some of the chat. We have two options here. We have the chat in itself and the Q&A. So let's see where we want to start. Tim is out there in the audience, and he taught with Valerie Eli 25 years ago. So he says hello. And he says, you have a wonderful partner. That's great.
That's right.
Tim is always full of compliments. He also gave a talk on Washington, D.C. for us just 2 weeks ago. Didn't know how cool. Let's see. Lots of compliments. Climate change. Could the period of drought around 10,000 AD coincide with drought conditions that might explain why Anasazi people left the Mesa Verde region? Also, each year in the 21st century has seen increasingly hot and dry environmental conditions. Can we draw any viable inferences from the climate change we are witnessing today in North America?
Okay, so there are a couple of pieces in there.
Yeah.
So the first one is the drought that we see in the Maya area is a couple centuries before the big drought that we think is happening in the American Southwest. So the drought that coincides with the abandonment of Chaco Canyon and places like that is a couple centuries later than this one. But one of the things that we do see right now, and some of this appears to be anthropogenic in the Maya area, and some of it is something else, or I should say, some of it is locally anthropogenic in the Maya area, and some of it is worldwide climate change that we're also causing. But one thing that we see is while we are sitting in drought here now in the West, the Maya area is also in severe drought and has been, well, for all of the years that I've been working at Mirador, they have all been characterized by drought. And the locals are terribly worried about that. And it's interesting. They all think it's they all believe that this is worldwide climate change. They are dialed in. But the other thing that is the case and I think has bigger lessons, is in the late classic, and again, we don't know enough yet for the pre-classic for this, but in the late classic, it is very likely that nearly all of that central Maya area was deforested. And the deforestation there would contribute to changes in rainfall patterns. So you have larger worldwide change in things like, El Nino events that have an effect on this, and worldwide cycles have an effect on this. But the other thing that's happening with the Maya is by deforesting the space, they change the way water moves in the system. So you get greater amounts of evaporation, less amounts of water retention in the space. And so part of that drought in the late classic appears to be at least exacerbated by the human impact on that local environment. And today, of course, our impacts are, on an entirely different scale. But that question of kind of resilience and vulnerability is something that I think really applies.
It's really eerie. We did have a question. Someone said, could you elaborate on the plaster, and realizing what you were saying back then in terms of resources and creating this plaster. Let's talk about that a little bit, because you had to burn a lot of wood in order to break down the limestone into building material.
Yeah. So to make that plaster, you have to do a couple of things. The first one, of course, is that you have to quarry the limestone, which is human labor, but is not environmentally costly. But then to turn it into stucco, to turn it into that plaster, it has to be cooked. It has to be cooked at high temperature and even temperature for a long period of time. And so getting the temperature right and the burn right, it requires the use of green wood, and a lot of it. And so their estimates, I'm sorry, I can't call them to mind without looking for them. But it's hectares per ton of plaster. And so the amount of forest that would have to be cut to cover something like La Danta with plaster is immense. And that, again, it's going to contribute to loss of forest. It's going to contribute potentially to changes in rainfall patterns. This is a great big aspect. On the one hand, you've got more mouths to feed, but the other thing, this is conspicuous consumption.
Is this plaster similar to what we consider today's plaster? So
yes.
Does it break down quick? How long? It's amazing that we actually still find it. You would think erosion and so many other factors, environment would just take that away. I'm thinking of my own house, and it's, the corners are already falling off on that plaster.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it has a lot to do with really local conditions. Mm-hmm. And so if something can get buried fast and have overgrowth over it fast, then it can survive a long time. And so, those big friezes that I showed you, they're nearly 2,000 years old, and you can see incredible levels of detail on them. Further down, there are sections that still have paint on them. And so if the conditions are right, you can really see it. In other places, So for example, you get up on a pyramid where you're more exposed to the elements, where you have a longer period out in the air and the rain and everything else before soil covers it up. There we find little tiny traces, enough to tell us that there was plaster there once, but that's it.
And it's just crazy to think, I mean, how large this was, your overlaying image, to think all of this being plastered, and just to think of the civilization that must have been in that spot is mind-blowing to me, you know, as we see it today, but tens of thousands of people, you said, going into this. It's just mind-blowing to think of this, you know, as we're flying over this canopy of woods in our era, to think that that was going on there. Mm-hmm. So question here, for how long do you see this project continuing? I think we're talking about the excavation and
Oh, I will be long gone, and all of the people who are working at the site will be long gone before it's finished.
Before we even know everything.
Potentially, I mean, clearly most of the site is never going to be excavated, because you just can't excavate all those hundreds of houses and things. It's just not possible. But even the large scale things that that will ultimately be done, it's a long, long time.
And so many more discoveries, I'm sure, will come out of this, and we will learn so much more. Julie is asking, how old are the native workers that are helping you at the site? And on that topic, I want to say how cool that Valerie goes with you down there and offers classes to these workers. What a great way to give back, and also help sustainability and help these workers, because, you know, education is key quite often. Yeah.
Well, so one of the things, I'm gonna go to that first.
Yeah.
One of the things that's inevitable with Mirador over the course of time is that it's going to become more and more a place where tourists go. I mean, it's not now. So the last year that we had figures, which was a couple of years ago, they documented that 1,600 tourists went to El Mirador in a year. So, you know, that's an average of, you know, what, 5 a day.
That's busy for this site.
Well, yeah, and so they're basically, right now, there are two kinds of tourists who go. One are people who hire a local guide, who it is usually a couple, and the couple has a couple of mules, and they take them out, they hike out with them, and the guides provide the food and the direction, because you don't want to get lost out there. And so the guides take them out, they set up a camp for them. These are usually young backpackers, you know, so most of the people doing this, they're kind of in their 20s. They're a lot of them are Europeans on gap year kinds of things who come. They're young kids, and they're right now, not for a lot of people yet, but for the village of Carmelitas, the guide work is one of the big sources of income. Mm-hmm. The other kind who come out are wealthy people who come out by helicopter with a tour guide from Guatemala City or someplace else. They fly in, they look at the site. They make us jealous, because sometimes they bring fast food to eat with them, because they were in civilization, you know, half an hour before. And so you see the family, and they're out there, they're carrying bags of fried chicken with them to go picnic on the site. And then they leave. And those, they're not contributing so much to the local economy, but they're part of spreading the word about the site. Just by contrast, Chichen Itza up in Yucatan gets several million visitors a year. And Tikal can get several thousand visitors in a day.
Yeah.
And so the Guatemalan government, on the one hand, sees this as potential economic development. The local population sees this as potentially, a source of jobs. And one of the ways that people in that economy are going to get a lead on surviving in that and prospering in that is, one, being able to speak English to outsiders, because most tourists, even if they come from other places, so your typical Danish or German tourist speaks some English. Yeah. And so, so English is a means to more success in that kind of work. A little bit of financial literacy is a help, hopefully in terms of putting yourself in a position for that. So, managing such that, on the one hand, you're able to bank more of what you make if you're working for us or whatever, but also, being able to make the investment. So if what you want to do is shift to guiding, and last year, I've had many workmen over the years who they see that as their long-term employment. Yeah. What they want to be able to do is invest in the equipment to be able to do it, to be able to invest in the mules and the other pieces. And so that there's a management aspect to that also we hope we're helping with. And so yeah, that education is an important part of the project, I think.
And I derailed the question a little bit with my comment, but average age of your worker is...
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So they range. So our youngest workmen are in their late teens. And I had a workman a couple of years ago who was over 80. Or at least he said he was over 80. He was completely, he was completely toothless, and he looked 80. And he said he was.
Good. Let me toggle back to, let's say, the Zoom. Another question here from Tim. Today is the Mayan language an endangered language? Historically, have Spanish-speaking government officials acted to limit or suppress the Mayan language, and in turn, Mayan tribal culture? That's a good question.
Yeah, it's several good questions. So the first thing I would note is there are somewhere around 20 Maya languages today. And I say it that way because a couple of them are severely endangered. So there are a couple of Maya languages that last I knew, were spoken by a handful of people who were elderly. And so other anthropological colleagues, not here, but in other places, one of the things that's happening is an effort to sort of preserve and save those languages. Others are spoken by, so the two biggest languages, Kachikal and Quiche, are both spoken by millions of people. There has been, over the years, a lot of pressure on both Maya culture and Maya language from the European part, the Spanish part of Maya society. The Maya have been horribly discriminated against. And warred against. And so I would say today there's a lot of pride in Maya culture. And I don't think I would call it endangered, but it's constantly under attack. Mm-hmm. And so, and the other thing that has happened, once again, is in terms of dollars, is the Guatemalan government and the European-based culture in Guatemala. One of the things that they have realized is that there are dollars in the Maya culture. And so people come to Guatemala because they want to be exposed to that culture. Because, I only showed you one picture of a Maya person, but the culture is beautiful. And outsiders want to experience it. And that drives the economy of people, some of whom are Mayan, some of whom are not. Yeah. And so the Guatemala as a whole, I think, is more invested in the survival of Maya culture.
I remember the amazing photos that you guys brought back from one of, from the trip to the Mayan culture. And also I do remember how much you go into all these different rituals who seem to, correct me if I'm wrong, but they kind of live side by side. You got the Mayan, you got the Catholic, and it's almost like they kind of have fused, and it's a very interesting. I mean, visiting Guatemala just for that alone is worth a trip. Yeah. We have Lillian writing, "Hey Rick, thanks as usual, very informative. Is this," meaning Merida, "is this anywhere close to where you are taking the December trip?" Well, in December we're going to, if it happens, we're going to Mexico, right?
Yeah.
So this is Guatemala, but yeah,
so the short answer, of course, is no, it's not close. We're going to be doing different groups in central Mexico if we're able to go this year.
Yeah.
We are, we have returning to the Maya area is on the list.
The Yucatan,
it's hard to slip the Maya trip into the calendar schedule in the same way. So we haven't offered it for a little while, but we certainly plan to do it again.
Yeah. Last year we went to Oaxaca. Just for those who are interested in traveling with Rick. Julie. Julie had a good question once again about the plaster. It seems to be a hot topic here. Was the plaster only used on temples, or did they use it on regular houses?
They used it on regular houses, and we find it, as plaza floors outdoors. It was used on those roads. It was used all over the place.
Yeah. Robert had a good question here. Let me see. Is there any way to date the images? He's talking about the Lidar. I mean, is there any way to date? I guess we're talking about what the images bring out. Is there a dating mechanism behind that?
Yeah, and it's old-fashioned archaeology. So what we do is, we clearly can't do them all, but what we do is devise a sample of the structures that are identified through the Lidar, and we go out and we dig. And so we'll put test units. The usual process is we try to figure out what the back of the building was, because there's frequently a midden there, a heap of ancient garbage there. And we'll sink a couple of 2x2 meter tests into there, and we'll study the stratigraphy of what is mostly pottery in these, and we'll try to date based on the pottery itself, or if we're lucky, there might be some carbon and things in there too. But mostly it's dated through archaeology on the ground, and using, like I said, primarily ceramics, because the other processes are very expensive, and it's hard to get the context that you really need.
I mean, thank you for showing us those Lidar images, which, like 10 years technology, that's cutting edge. But I've never seen it. And it's just incredible how much more, and how GPS signals help us to just, now I know where we are. It's amazing. Let me see. A quick distinction once again between the classical and the pre-classical era, and maybe what's the difference between the two?
So, for a long time, they really thought that Maya culture took off in the beginning of what they called the classic. And the classic is kind of characterized first by the widespread use of writing in stone. So the Maya started erecting, things like great big pieces of sculpture with panels of writing all over them. And they started putting panels of writing on the sides of buildings and on staircases and all sorts of different places. And so that's the first big piece. The second is that grew out of that is some ideas of how the Maya were governed during the Classic. And those in part come from terms that we see in the writing. And so there was this kind of overall picture. The word classic was basically coined by art historians, but there's kind of this overall picture of what Maya society looked like during this period from about 200 to about 900 AD. And what happened before 200 was kind of seen as prelude. Mm-hmm. One of the things that Mirador and other sites around it are making abundantly clear is that the pre-classic was not prelude. The pre-classic was, well, for starters, much more like the classic than we thought. But the big centers, they may actually be bigger than the big centers in the classic period. They're not writing in the same way. And so we lack a lot of detail in terms of how politics worked, for example. But we know, for example, from that panel that I showed you, we can identify the characters on that panel. And those are characters that were part of the mythology through the classic period and right up into the colonial period. And so we can see that kind of continuity. I think one thing that is gonna be true is we're probably not gonna think of them as such separate things down the road.
Yeah, I find it fascinating how, 3,000 years of history is in the Mayan culture, living and existing today. When you're saying, the mythology and all the rituals that they have, I think that alone is like mind-blowing to me as a novice, as somebody who hears about this for maybe the second time in my life. Let's see. Christine, new large site, platform with a 13-foot tall pyramid found in Tabasco State. Is that the same sensing method talked about in this lecture?
So I think the site that she's talking about, it was this great big, like I said, not terribly tall, but this great big flat piece of earthworks that probably had a whole bunch of stuff on top of it that they don't know about now. And so this thing, as I recall, it's close to 1 kilometer long. And it's this big giant rectangle of raised, artificially raised earth. And it was discovered by Lidar. I guess that's the short answer to that. I don't know very much about it. I've read the kind of preliminary information on it, but there isn't much out about it yet. I mean, I expect it will be in the next few months.
Wow. Well, again, Lily and Valerie has such a good and beautiful heart. I agree. For those who don't know, Valerie also was, I need to date, 2018 Teacher of the Year in Utah. 17?
Mm-hmm. For the state,
okay.
Yeah.
2017 teacher. Shout outs to all the teachers out there. Maybe we have some in the audience, but yeah. Let's see. So Marilyn writes, I see Robert Lachlan, who was a preserver of the Mayan language, has died at 85. Comments about him, question mark.
I didn't know him. There's not much I can say.
Okay. Well, Vicky, thank you very much. Vicky had compliments. I'm blushing now for me, so she also thanks me. Thank you very much. Vicky, much appreciated. I'll toggle back if there's maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and then we can close. Okay. Yeah, once again, just anonymous attendee. Is Valerie as nice in person as she seems in the pictures? Yes, guaranteed. That question has been answered. I think this is a great, although it says I have more questions, but I think I answered them all. I think I got to all of them. It's a little bit hard to toggle between the 2 platforms of there's one more just came in, I think. Maybe not. Was it over on the chat? Oh, yes, there was one more. Let's see. How long did it take to excavate the temples in Tikal?
So the temples in Tikal, they did most of the work in the 1950s. So the ones that I showed you, so 1, 2, and 4. 4 is actually being excavated now, parts of it. So they excavated the top of it a long time ago, and they're sort of working on the staircase and other parts of it now. But the pieces downtown, it took somewhere between 10 and 20 years.
That's a lot of work.
There are some, I'm sure people can find them online. There are some amazing pictures of some of the excavation stuff, old black and whites, of especially Temple 1 as it's being cleared. So just when all they've done is knock the forest off it. And it was very intact, but they're kind of neat to look for if people want to kind of get online for it.
What I found interesting, your comment about the photos, even if you just take photos of the excavation, Guatemala is saying it's our property. So that kind of opened to me the question, of course, and we had our group, I believe, in some museum with you, and you said that you see this, I unearthed that, and your name wasn't attached to it, and somebody was shocked. But where does the archaeological treasure, if you want, so end up? What is being done with this?
So most of it is, it goes ultimately into the National Museum in Guatemala City. Most of it is storage, right? So I mean, yeah, there are millions of pieces of broken pieces of pottery. And those go into storage where future archaeologists can go back and look at them and learn more about them. Some of the fancier stuff, the more visual stuff, winds up today. It winds up in the National Museum. They're actually in La Antigua. They're building a museum devoted to El Mirador. And so a lot of the material from there will go into that museum. And I want to say, you know, the ownership of all that the photographs and everything else, that is completely just. And the Guatemalan government is very cooperative about it. I mean, it was one of those things where, you know, going and getting those permissions for this wasn't, it didn't seem like good cost and benefits.
Is it like a give and take? Is it to understand, yeah, like Guatemala benefits from your work, but you benefit from Guatemala letting you do this? So
yeah, they host us. They supply work. I mean, well, they allow us to work there, and they supply. You know, we hope that, you know, as many of the people working there as possible are Guatemalans. We you know, it would be in a lot of ways better to be out of a job and to have, you know, it be that that Guatemala could do all of the work, but it's tremendously expensive, and training archaeologists is tremendously expensive, and so you know, we still have the privilege, I guess.
I mean, I can only imagine, like, let's say if it was someone, you know, I know how to dig a hole, but guarantee you I will destroy probably half of the stuff that's in there, which needs to be preserved. So I think, you know, I only have these images with, you know, people in the brushes and the little tools. So I can only imagine how tedious and how laborious all of this is in the jungle, where at what, 100 degrees, 90 degrees, what?
So the actual temperatures to Utahns don't sound terribly high. And so a typical summer day in Mirador is, somewhere from the very high 80s to the mid 90s. But it's also 90+% humidity.
Yeah.
And so it's a very, very different kind of heat.
Closing, maybe, if we can. I love to keep chatting and talking, but we'll have to come to an end. So once again, shout out to all the alumni. Hopefully somebody new found us. I know we have a lot of repeat people coming back to our webinar. So thank you everyone out there who's still there. Thank you for joining us today. I had one more question. Thinking of Indiana Jones running with, this thing, whatever. What was the coolest thing that you ever found in your work? Is that a tough question or?
It is. So a long time ago at Coupon, I got to be the sort of person supervising, because remember, in this part of the world, mostly what the archaeologists are doing are taking notes and drawing pictures and drawing diagrams and maps and taking photographs. And we're not actually doing most of the actual moving of dirt. But I got to be supervising a room in a building at Copan that had a great big, we call it a bench, and it's basically a combination bed and throne that had a depiction of the cosmos on the front of it, basically. So it had what we call a sky serpent on the front of it. And that was pretty exciting. That's probably the thing that you saw in the pictures a while back where someone seemed to be upset that I didn't get credit, but I shouldn't have gotten credit. I just got to be happy. But most of what I do is, this kind of trying to understand the relationship between population and environment. And so most of the excavation that I do isn't really yielding a lot of exciting things. Exciting individual objects.
Right. It's not
it's everything together that's the exciting part.
I think so too, and I learned a lot today. So I once again profusely thank you for all that information, for taking us out of our living rooms for an hour and now probably 24 minutes, and plotting us into the jungle of Guatemala and helping us seeing what the summer life of an anthropologist and archaeologist looks like. So.
It was a pleasure. I'm happy to do it.
Thank you so much. Everyone out there, have a good day. Be safe and healthy, okay? Take care.